the types of security listed in 28.204. Oh, hi. Just catching up on the FAR. You know, it's very important to understand the principles of the FAR, and that's what this video is about. If you're new to the federal acquisition regulation, either from the industry side or the government side, well then get your FAR, go to your bedside table where you keep your FAR, and we'll talk about the FAR. This video is going to be FAR out. All right, so 5 parts of the FAR that I recommend you get to know first. The federal acquisition regulation doesn't have to be complicated, but I do recommend whether you're in industry or whether you're in government that you learn the FAR, especially these parts of the FAR. But it doesn't matter whether you're using an OTA or a non-FAR based vehicle. It's really important to get to know the FAR, the underlying principles of the FAR. Especially when you start deviating from the FAR, when you use some of these other vehicles, you'll know what you're deviating from. So, FAR Part 2. Now you may think it's a little strange. FAR Part 2 is just the definitions, that's it. It's like a glossary of all of the different type of terms. But the reason why I picked this as something that you should learn if you're new to the FAR is because in each of these terms, it has the underlying concept of what acquisition really means. Terms like contract. Know what contract says in the FAR. Know what the definition of best value. And if you do that, you'll start to capture the essence of what these words are supposed to mean, and you would be surprised how much that comes out in conversations, especially in arguments. For our industry friends out there, as you start capturing the underlying principles, the government can't really argue with you if you're using the actual definition of the FAR. And again, you would be amazed of how little this part is used in conversation and people's understanding of what the FAR actually means. Get to know Part 2, get to know the underlying principles. So remember, definitions are important. Remember the words of Shakespeare. An equitable price adjustment based on a substantive modification by any other name will smell just as sweet. All right, next most important part of the FAR, maybe the most used part of the FAR by a lot of offices, is Part 16, types of contracts. Now, the reason why I put this on the list is not because it's the section that talks about fixed price contracts versus cost reimbursement contracts, and then the difference of risk between the two. Very interesting conversation. It also talks about this idea of indefinite delivery contracts and ordering agreements. Now, this is all the rage right now in the government, is using these big ordering vehicles. It makes things faster, you can do more efficient ordering, and so many of these vehicles are summarized in Part 16. So Part 16 describes requirements contracts, IDIQs, basic ordering agreements, basic agreements. Now later you have Part 13 that talks about BPAs, you have Part 8 that talks about supply schedule BPAs, but those are the main parts that talk about these ordering vehicles. And Part 16 not only talks about how to set those types of vehicles up, but how to order from them. So FAR 16.505, get to know 16.505. This part will also allow you to really start being able to distinguish between a requirements contract versus an IDIQ, which is an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract, versus a BOA, a basic ordering agreement, versus a basic agreement. Now, people throw these terms around in the office all the time. You will be able to understand when it's most appropriate to use one over the other. Very valuable knowledge for you. Part 13, simplified acquisition. So if you're not doing any orders, like Part 16 that we just talked about, this is the part of the FAR that you want to be in. And there's a threshold, the simplified acquisition threshold. And if you go under that threshold, you can use Part 13, which is simplified, streamlined. So what you can do not only is know about Part 13 and all the ins and outs of Part 13, but try to find all the different kind of ways, waivers, justifications to actually get you in this part, so you don't have to use Part 15. The other reason why it's good for you to really get to know Part 13, not just know the sections, but really get to know the principles behind it, is that if you're going to use Part 13, then you need to use Part 13, not use Part 15, which we'll talk about later, and say you're using Part 13. There's some things in here that tell you you need to simplify your documentation. You need to use common sense, basically. You need to limit the things that you do to make this a streamlined acquisition. People who don't understand Part 13 will say they're using Part 13. They'll go through all the hurdles to get themselves into Part 13, and then they won't even use Part 13. They'll just make it a really long acquisition. It's simplified for a reason. Get to know Part 13, simplify your acquisitions. Part 12, good old Part 12, acquisition of commercial items. Now, the biggest misunderstanding of Part 12 is people think of it like it's a completely separate way of contracting, and they say, are you going to use Part 12 or are you going to use Part 13? But Part 12 is not like Part 13. You use Part 12 like a seasoning, like in conjunction with Part 13 or in conjunction with Part 15. It's just commercial. So you can do a simplified acquisition like Part 13. If you make it commercial, then you're just throwing some Part 12 ketchup on your chicken. You can do a big Part 15 procurement. If it's going commercial, you just throw some ketchup on your big Part 15 steak. It's like wearing rose-colored sunglasses. If you're going to be in the commercial land, just put your Part 12 sunglasses on. And then everything you look at, whether it's Part 13, Part 16, Part 15, it's going to have that sunny commercial nature to it. So you use Part 12 in conjunction, not instead of the other parts. Okay, so the number one FAR part to know is Part 15, contracting by negotiation. The most important part to know about, especially the principles within, but it's the part that you never want to use. You never want to use a Part 15 procurement if you can help it. You want to go into Part 13. You want to go into a Part 16. But within Part 15 are all of the underlying principles, or most of them, about a competition, about setting a best value, about using evaluation criteria, about doing debriefings to offers, about price and price analysis, about being late, proposals that are late. So even though you don't want to say you're using a Part 15 procurement, so much case law, so many arguments, so many discussions are all from within this Part 15. Now, the reason you don't want to use Part 15 is because within Part 15 you have great principles, but you also have incredibly regulated processes and procedures that will slow down your procurement. So if you say you're not using Part 15, where thou shalt do this for 30 days, thou shalt do that, you can actually slip into Part 13, do things a lot more streamlined, but you still want to carry a lot of these principles from Part 15. Get to know Part 15. It'll make you a better human being. Thanks, everyone. That's the video. Hopefully this was helpful for you. Remember, learn the FAR, read it, burn it into your hearts, sear it into your mind. Knowledge is power. And when you do that, get used to all the people that will want to hang out with you, all the parties you'll be invited to, all the friends that you're going to have, because of how much you know about the federal acquisition regulation. Use your power responsibly. We'll see you next time. Acquisition's hard, but it doesn't have to be. Whether you're from government or industry, if you're looking for solutions to your hard problems, click the link below to schedule a chat. We'd love to hear from you.